back to Care Talk. I'm joined today by my colleague, and I'm going to let her introduce herself.
Thank you, Corey. My name is Christine Kennedy Babineau. I'm the Director of Programs and Community Engagement for Hospice Southeast New Brunswick.
Christine, you manage our volunteer program under that umbrella. Can you talk to me a bit about why volunteer management for you personally?
Sure. So I'm one of the rare people that knew what they wanted to do with their lives from a really young age. I was 12, and I knew that seniors were the people that, or the population that I wanted to work with. So in university, I studied family studies and gerontology. And while I was going to university, I ended up working as a volunteer manager at the hospital. I had volunteered there for 5 years, starting as young as 14 when they'd let me in, and had volunteered, full-time for years at the hospital growing up. And I really understood why volunteering was so important and how it was mutually beneficial, that both the young people volunteering in the summers would get so much out of it that would help with their careers and resumes, but the people that were benefiting from what they were doing were also getting that benefit. So it was really a mutually beneficial experience. So managing that volunteer program for a few years, volunteering in it, and then working in nonprofit, my entire career, 25 plus years, volunteers have been an instrumental part of the work that I've done across all the different organizations that I've worked for. Oftentimes, volunteers are the reason an organization even exists, including hospice. It's volunteers that really started it all and continue to drive. Volunteers are the driving force of a lot of nonprofits. They create the board of directors. They help shape the mission, vision, values of organizations. And so volunteers I see as the backbone of organizations and the launching point for most of them. And so it's always been a topic that I've been interested in, I've been invested in. I've always volunteered my whole life. And I just think it's really important to have competently run programs so that people have mutually beneficial experiences.
I agree 100%. When you look at all the volunteer opportunities in a city like Greater Moncton, there's a lot of options. Why should a volunteer choose to come to hospice? What do we offer that's unique?
It's an excellent question. There are so many nonprofit organizations in the region, all of them in need of volunteer supports to be able to achieve their mission, and hospice is no different. There are a wide variety of ways that people can be involved in our organization, either specifically working with people who are palliative and their families, or working in other ways like our boutique hospice shop that indirectly supports that population. But I think at the end of the day, what makes what we do unique and what we have to offer volunteers is this unique environment. And this, for lack of a better word, the specialness of what it is that we do. Hospice care is palliative care. And palliative care is, providing support and services at the end of life. And so our volunteers are involved in a wide variety of ways with the individuals who are facing the end of life and the families and loved ones, friends, coworkers connected with them.
Also working closely with our staff, which is very unique to most volunteer opportunities in the city. We have nurses here and volunteer managers and an amazing secretary. And you get to come here and really interact with a lot of people from a lot of different fields. And together we can all make a really big difference in people's lives.
Absolutely.
You kind of got into a little bit, but what are the volunteer opportunities here at hospice? Can we go into those a little bit?
Absolutely. There's a wide variety of ways that people can support our organization. And I literally am going to list a bunch of them. But I think it's important to point out that there are different commitments as well.
Yeah.
I think the most meaningful roles that we offer are the longer term relationship building roles. But at the same time, there's still a ton of benefit that come from some of those more micro volunteer opportunities where you're working with an organization and your organization has employer-supported volunteer opportunities. So you go and you spend a morning with us at the shop volunteering, and you leave there learning about our cause and why it's important and seeing all the inner workings that make what we do there possible.
Yeah.
So there's really a wide variety of commitment levels required, in addition to a wide variety of different roles. So the boutique hospice shop is, I think, the place I'll start, because it's really where volunteers first got involved in the organization. So obviously the board of directors comprised of volunteers, but that board had opened boutique hospice shop back in 2009, I think. So we've been around a while.
Yeah.
And volunteers were the lifeblood of that. They were what made that possible. And volunteers continue to be a really instrumental portion or part of that team. So what does a volunteer at the boutique do? Almost anything.
It's a really wide variety of
really
jobs at the shop.
Yeah. And we do have staff supports there that, but volunteers are involved in so many ways. And really the bulk of what we see them doing is going through the donated items. So for anyone that's not familiar, Boutique Hospice Shop is a retail resale shop, upscale kind of feel, where people in the community, supporters in the community, donate new or slightly used items. We then go through those items, decide what is something we could sell in the shop, price it, put it out on the floor and sell it. Sales from all of those items that are donated go back to support the services that hospice offers, and the donor gets a tax receipt for whatever the sales price is of the item. So at the end of the year, we issue a tax receipt. Anything that's $20 and over total will get a tax receipt. And so those items, when they're donated, don't just go from the donation door to the floor. That we have a whole process, and that's really where volunteers are the most important component, that they're going through all of those donated items. They're checking clothing for rips or tears or holes, stains, that kind of thing. And they're going through and making sure that that donor ID is on the item so that the donor will get that tax receipt. And so they're often back there working as part of a team. They're having fun.
Yeah.
I think, that mutually beneficial volunteer experience is so important. You have to get something out of it. And I think for a lot of people that are in that role, they're going and they're having some social time. They're connecting with people they've been volunteering with consistently for years. They're meeting new people and new volunteers. And they know that they're making a difference. So, and there's specialized roles within the boutique as well. Like we have one lady that's been volunteering for what seems like forever, ironing. I'm sorry, you couldn't pay me to iron, but she loves it.
Yeah.
And we need that. And it's so incredible to have someone with that interest and skill set. So I think, it's part of our program too is finding those niches for people.
Yeah.
We're not going to create a role just to meet someone's need or desire. But when we have specific needs and desires and find the right person that has that skill, we're absolutely going to connect them with that opportunity.
100%. So a lot of our volunteer opportunities are here at Maison Bauhaus. From the very first second you walk in the door with the greeters. Can we get into some of those opportunities next?
Absolutely. So like you said, at Maison Albert House, the moment you walk in our door, you're greeted by a volunteer. So we have, literally we call them greeters. And those greeters are here 12 hours a day. So they're 4 3-hour shifts, 7 days a week. So a volunteer would commit to work, say 9 to noon as an example. And they are at the door to be that welcoming face. So when a family member or loved one comes in to visit their, the person that's a resident, there's someone friendly smiling at them that shows them where to go, what to do, can help them get a cup of coffee. Yeah. And what started as a pandemic requirement, we needed people to sign in and put on a mask and all of that, has really turned into best practice for us, that we are providing that person for people that, I don't know who to talk to or where to go. I'm overwhelmed walking into this building for the first time. It's beautiful, but I'm still scared. Well, here's a person that's smiling at me and willing to show me around. Yeah. I think it's a really important role that volunteers have with the organization, and yet it's really simple.
Yeah.
Other ways that volunteers are involved here at Maison Albert House are in our kitchen. So we have a couple of different types of kitchen volunteers. Some of them have culinary experience, that they have cooked in professional kitchens or similar environments in the past, and they're supporting our our team there in preparing meals or coming up with recipes or getting the groceries, things that support the meal preparation portion. We also have volunteers that are coming in at meal times and helping to serve the meals. So a meal that's already prepared is being taken down to people's rooms, making sure that people have what they need. There's a lot of love and care that goes into the meals that are prepared in this facility, and I think the volunteers really help make that possible and amplify what the staff are doing and trying to do by giving them the extra hands. Sometimes it's as simple as like, I don't have any culinary experience, but I want to help. So we've got somebody, that is literally washing dishes. Again, couldn't pay me to do that, but it's the perfect fit for him. It's so different from what he does in his 9 to 5. And he knows he's making an impact and having a difference, that is the right fit for him. So I think finding the right role for people is super important. And again, we have lots of needs, but it's, part of why there's so many different opportunities is that you can find the right role for each person. We also have volunteers that typically they have some experience with us. They've been involved in some way, or they started with a greeter and became familiar with us, or they worked in the kitchen to become familiar. But we do have a small but growing program of volunteers that do some bedside work. So that's actually going and sitting with residents. Usually we hear people saying, like, I want to sit with someone that doesn't have family. But it's not always those people that need that. Sometimes people just need companionship in between their family visits. Or the family, it gives people, as much as we're providing that 24/7 care, our staff are not sitting bedside with people. And so sometimes having a volunteer that will come and sit with your loved one gives you the respite and comfort to walk away for an hour and go get some lunch, or to go home and do some laundry, knowing that you haven't left your loved one with no one at their side. And even though, again, there's people are here 24/7, but I think volunteers have a role to offer there in providing that additional layer of comfort and companionship. And talking to them about their life stories. And sometimes it's super simple things like, what did you eat for breakfast? But other times people are reflecting on their lives and their experiences, and they want someone to listen. Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, when our volunteers sit with people and listen to them and validate their stories, I think we're doing a great service for those residents at the end of life.
Yeah. One thing that I've found amazing with the volunteers going in more and more is hearing from residents about how they don't want to burden their family, but they want to talk to somebody that they get to know and trust. And a lot of times that volunteer becomes that person who they know they can trust. They're not burdening that volunteer, but it can become a really special relationship. So very glad that we're starting to open that up a little bit more, and we're seeing some really good results.
Yeah, absolutely. We also have a committee of volunteers that provide a program called End of Life Wishes. And that End of Life Wishes program is intended to grant special wishes. Now, we're not flying to Disney, but we have had some really tremendous wishes that we have been asked and have been able to grant. So, anybody that follows us on Facebook has seen the little mini horses that came to visit. A former jockey was wishing he could see horses one more time, so we were able to bring them in. We do a lot of family meals, special theme, it might be, I would love to have a lobster dinner with my loved ones, so making that happen. Having special musical performances. We had someone from a South American country that we had some music that was familiar to where she had come from played for her and her family. So the End of Life Wishes volunteers are the ones that put those wishes into action. So simple things like going and buying balloons and a cake or some food, or setting up the tables so that the family can gather, and making sure that things are tidied up after. It's not complicated things typically. Or it could be contacting a service provider to find out about an accessible wheelchair bus so we can take someone to the beach, which is something that just happened recently. But the volunteer team comes together to grant those wishes and make those things happen for our residents and their loved ones, and they're really special memories. So that's another way that volunteers are involved in working in this building. We also are really fortunate to have a physical space outdoors for our Serenity Garden that was in memory of Paul Whitney. The Serenity Garden also has a team of volunteers that are making that possible. So from engaging volunteers temporarily through the Kodiak Woodworkers Guild to get this pergola designed and built, to engaging our own volunteers longer term, we've got people that come and tend to that garden. They talk to the kitchen about what herbs and spices would you like and make sure those get planted. What flowers are edible that you could put on a plate and make sure that those get planted. What birds and butterflies are attracted to what flowers and making sure that those get planted so that when our residents or family members go and sit out there, or staff for that matter, it's a place of solitude and reflection that anybody can go. That the volunteers have literally planted and grown that garden into a really comfortable space for people to use. So many different ways for volunteers to support our work.
Absolutely. Another way that volunteers historically have been involved in this organization are through community-based programs supporting people that are living at home. That's something that we still offer to this day. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Providing that at-home respite or home support is historically one of the things this organization has done. I think it started right at the impetus of the organization. We were doing that kind of work. COVID changed things a bit, and we're really fortunate in the last recent years to receive some funding to have a program that's called NavCare. And Corey, I know you're really familiar with NavCare because you're our NavCare volunteer coordinator. So can you tell people a little bit about what NavCare is?
Yeah, sure. NavCare is really getting volunteers into the community, into people's homes to provide support. Support for the clients, support for the families. Frequently, we hear about people that are in their home that are isolated, and we all know the negative effects of that isolation. So volunteers get to go in, spend time with those clients to help release that burden. We also see families that can't really get away to run errands or to do banking, things like that. Volunteers can go in to stay with the clients so that the family can then have some worry-free time to maybe go have dinner with a friend or go get some groceries. Very simple things that we take for granted every day. So that's another really important way that volunteers can get involved, and something that I'm very proud to run.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing about that. I think it's important to mention, too, that program is available across southeast New Brunswick. So any corner of Albert, Westmoreland, or Kent County, people that live in any of those areas can access the NavCare program, which means that volunteers can volunteer in their own communities. Yeah. So if you're not in Greater Moncton, or if driving into Maison Albert House or Boutique Hospice Shop is a challenge, it doesn't preclude you from volunteering. Absolutely. You can still be involved, specifically through that NavCare community and helping people that live in where you live.
The other important role that our volunteers play is in our grief supports. Another thing that historically we've been offering for well over a decade. Can we talk a little bit about those grief support programs?
Absolutely. I think anybody that's come through our grief support programs is familiar with Ruth Johnstone. She has been leading these grief support groups for the last 18 years. We are actively recruiting volunteers that can help continue that facilitation work, acknowledging Ruth's not going to do it forever, even though we'd love her to. So we've been able to get a couple of new volunteers to offer those programs in English and in French and virtually as well. So really building on the strong foundation that the organization has built with Ruth's support. So volunteers that offer those grief and bereavement support programs are really providing peer support. So they have lived experience. We do provide some training and support, but they are really providing an outlet to access that peer support of someone who's been there. I think throughout the process of grief and the whole journey of anticipatory grief, knowing that your loved one's going to die or there's been a diagnosis, there's something going to happen, and through to having them pass and then dealing with the grief period after, for me personally, but also talking to lots of people, I think one of the most important things is to see that you're not alone. Grief is such a solitary experience. You feel, even though everyone around you is losing that person too, you feel really alone because your relationship with that person is different than anybody else's. But at the end of the day, you're not alone. And while the other person's experience isn't the same as you, they have that lived experience. They have that understanding. I truly believe that no one grief is better or worse than the other. My tragedy is the worst tragedy possible, but your tragedy is also the worst tragedy possible to you. Tragedy, and maybe a harsh word, but the loss of a loved one being what I mean. So I think that peer support is really an essential service that we're providing to the community in giving them a safe space to talk about it and to share about it, to do different activities. We have a 7-week grief program. That's mostly what we're talking about here, that has a structured plan to it. There is a task from A to B to accomplish each of those weeks. But while you're doing that with the volunteers' leadership, you're also building connections with other participants, other people that are going through that similar experience or are somewhere, along the grief journey with you. So I think there's so much value that our volunteers are offering the community. We've also been really fortunate to have volunteers join us to offer some other grief programming. So specifically, we've got a couple of grief walks that we're going to try this fall and see what works. And I think that's one of the neat things about volunteer engagement is you've got people that come to the table with, hey, I've got this great idea. Well, yeah, let's go for a walk in the woods and talk about grief, or not talk about grief, but know you're safe. So when a volunteer approaches you with an idea that makes sense, that fits with our mission, we say yes, wherever we can. And so we're able to offer these grief walks. One will be a fall colors walk at Centennial Park under the pretty fall leaves. Another, we're going to walk at Riverview's riverfront under the lights. But those programs are possible because we've got volunteers engaged and able to facilitate them. We also have coping with grief during the holidays session that, again, is possible because of volunteers. The holidays can be a really challenging time for a lot of people. We all, reminisce and reflect on the traditions, and now with the loved one gone, those traditions are different. And so we offer this one-time session about, coping with grief during the holidays that, again, is possible because of our volunteers. Another thing that's, with our grief programs, but not exactly grief, is our Death Cafe. Yeah. And that's something that's super popular with the community. Again, it's thanks to volunteers that we started that and that we're able to continue to do that. We have a daytime session once a month. We have an evening session once a month. They're both right now held at Omni Quality Living, which is at 230 John Street in Moncton. Free parking, free refreshments. They've been a fantastic support. But those death cafes are a really valuable opportunity for the community at large to be a part of. And I really encourage people to come out and participate in one of those and see what it's all about. It's not necessarily grief support, but for some people it might serve as that. It's for them to judge. But the intention of a death cafe is to give a safe space for people to talk about death, to say that word. It's a scary word for all of us. But to say the word death, to talk about what happens before, during, after we die. And really the conversations that happen at the death cafes are guided by the people that attend. So they seem to be, every time I've attended, we've had very different conversations. It really depends who's in the room. The volunteers that lead that, their job is to guide the conversation, to make sure that no one person takes over the whole session, that if someone is clearly upset by something, that they're provided with additional support or guided to other resources. They're there, just to guide along the conversation and make sure that it is a safe and comfortable space for people to have these conversations, because they can be pretty emotionally charged. People Absolutely. Have some strong feelings about this. Yeah. But generally speaking, it's just a safe space to come together, gather with people that are willing and comfortable to have those difficult conversations, or that just want to listen to other people having those conversations. So the Death Cafe, again, a volunteer-led program that wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for the volunteers that give of their time and their talent to this organization.
If somebody wants to get involved in any of those programs, how do they become a volunteer at Hospice Southeast New Brunswick?
Great question. We try to make it as simple as possible. We don't want an application process to be a barrier. But at the same time, we need to do our due diligence.
Yeah.
So it starts by simply reaching out, and the best way to do that is through our website. So hospicesenb.ca/volunteer. Go onto our site and fill out a super basic volunteer application form. We really just need basic information of how do we reach you. And then we invite you to either come in for a one-on-one interview with either one of us, Corey.
Yep.
You or I are the primary people that would do that. But come in and have an interview with us, or attend a volunteer information session. We offer those, you offer those regularly, at least once a month.
Yep.
Virtually through Zoom, just to talk about the different opportunities and what's needed, what the commitment is. Because it could be, we need you to commit to 2 or 3 hours once a week indefinitely, or it could be we need you to show up for a golf tournament one time a year. There's a ton of different ways. And we didn't talk about special event volunteers. That's a whole other thing, that we've got volunteers that support our fundraising and special event activities, and that looks different based on every activity and what skills that person has to offer. So that's a whole other way that volunteers can support us. But we have those conversations through the volunteer information sessions or through the interviews. And once we're, and along that process too, we ask that people get a police record check. We provide a letter that you then take to your local RCMP detachment. So in Greater Moncton, for Riverview, Dieppe, and Moncton, that's the Main Street Moncton detachment. But we ask you to take this letter and go down and fill out a form. Their form, I think, is probably the most complicated part of the whole process. Yeah. Let's be honest. Just filling out the form with your information and providing 2 pieces of government-issued ID, including one that's photo. But there's no cost to have that done. It really takes 10 minutes. It's not difficult. And it's just another layer in our due diligence to make sure that we have the right people providing support and volunteering with our organization. So that police record check, coming and having a meeting with us, and then training. So once we've worked with you to identify if this organization is the right fit for you, because going back to what we said in the beginning, there's so many different places that we might realize in talking to you that, sure, we'd love to have your support because we need volunteers too, but we might realize that the skills you have to offer could really be beneficial elsewhere. So our goal is to provide a mutually beneficial experience. And so we're going to make sure that this really is the right place for you to volunteer. Once we know that's right, then we figure out what the right role is. How is it that you want to be volunteered or be engaged with us? And so each role has its own training. So let's use the greeter as a good example. So someone that wants to be a greeter at Maison Albert House would be provided with a position description. There's a training document that's, 5 or 6 pages long, not complicated, but it's kind of the ins and outs of how things work here. The volunteer's provided with that information, and then they come in and they shadow another volunteer for a shift, so that they are familiar, they can ask questions, and then, once they're comfortable, once they've had the training and support that they need, then they're able to start and have their regular shift. So it varies by role. NavCare, is a whole other thing where there's an online module process that people need to go through to be able to qualify. But it's really about making sure that we have the orientation and training sessions available that are tailored to the role to make sure people have the skills and knowledge they need to be successful.
Absolutely. And then once you become a volunteer, we'll be here to support you throughout your journey.
Absolutely.
So Christine, now we're going to veer away from the volunteer piece. And I'm going to ask the same final question that I ask everybody that comes in this podcast. If we're making a hospice mixtape, which we're definitely going to be making a hospice Spotify playlist, I believe, stay tuned. What song are you going to add to it? Now, I know you want to add 22 songs.
I do.
We're going to limit it to a couple songs here. What song do you want to add to that mixtape, Christine?
I love music. And I've told you, I can't limit it to one song. But for the purposes of today, my current song is When You Lose Someone by Nina Nesbitt.
Okay.
Are you familiar with that one?
I've heard it before, yes.
Yeah. Music has had a really important role in my grief journey. I recently lost my sister. And this song has been a really important piece of my grief journey. Is that, I don't know if that sounds silly or not. Everyone's grief journey is different. But this song just speaks to so many parts of my lived experience. And even though she's singing about how when you lose someone, it's the hardest thing you've ever had happen, and it hits you like a train, essentially, I don't feel alone.
Yeah.
And she has a beautiful voice. And the song makes me smile.
Yeah.
And I went through a period where I played it every day, all day. When I drove in the car, it was my song. But it didn't make me sad. It reminded me of my sister Heather, and it made me feel joyful. And I think working in palliative, in this grief space, it's a song that more people should know about. I just happened across it. So I want us to add that song to our playlist. And then I want you to come back and ask me for like 10 more, because I've got a whole bunch.
Okay, we'll do. No, I don't think it's silly at all. I think music plays an important role in our grief journey. I think music plays an important role in all aspects of our life. Culturally, I think music is huge. And I'm loving how our playlist is starting to grow. So, Christine, thank you for joining me. I can't wait to have you back on sometime. And your wisdom and knowledge is very much appreciated by this podcast. So, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Corey. I appreciate the opportunity to talk. You know, I'm a long-winded one, so I think this might be a long podcast. But thank you to you for the invitation, and to anyone that's listened this long. There's so many ways to be involved and support the organization, but also to get some really meaningful experience out of that. I encourage anyone that's interested, even if you're not sure if it's the right fit or not, reach out. Via email, online, through a phone call, reach out to us and learn more.
Yeah. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Take care. All right, I'd like to thank Christine for joining me this month on the podcast for a very informative conversation about volunteering. Volunteers are so crucial to everything that we do here at Hospice. This Sunday, September 15th, we have our Hospice Memorial Walk sponsored by Subaru of Moncton at Centennial Park. That all gets underway at 2 p.m., and we hope to see you all there. I'd like to thank you all for joining us this month on the Care to Talk podcast with Hospice Southeast New Brunswick.